Hey, I'm Daniel Berger, and this is Adventures of a Real Estate Broker. Welcome to the podcast where Metro New York real estate meets great stories and a douse of humor. Forget the dry sales talk. Here we dive into the fun and unexpected moments of real estate. Join me each week as we explore Westchester, Long Island, the Bronx, and more. You'll hear about the people, the places, and the crazy situations that make this industry so interesting. Thanks to our sponsor, Remax Prestige Properties, we're ready to share the lighter side of real estate. Whether you're a pro, a buyer, or just curious, we've got something for everyone. Ready for today's adventure? Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Adventures of a Real Estate Broker with Daniel Berger. I'm excited to have Rick Alpert today. He is the host of the Key to the City of Angels podcast. This is what people have said about him. Rick is an absolute rock star. Rick is knowledgeable. He's aggressive. He's very determined with a can-do attitude. Sounds like someone that we want to have on the podcast. He's an agent, a consultant. He's the director of business development for L'America, and he's also an investor. So I think it's really good to have somebody who can do all of those things as well as guide his clients for buying and selling. And with that, Rick, I'm honored to have you on the podcast this week.
I appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to it.
So I don't know if other people have known, but there's a lot that's going on in LA lately, right? Some crazy stuff that's happening. Are you affected by the fires? Is that in your area, out of your area, and give us a little bit of what's going on there?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate. There was one fire that was close to me, but it wasn't close enough to where we had to evacuate. We did have to evacuate for one night just because it was so smoky and there was no power. I'm like, well, why am I here? Outside of that, fortunately, we're okay. Most of my clients are fine. I have worked in the Palisades before, and I have worked in the Altadena, Pasadena general area. But at least for a lot of my direct clients, they've been fine. As far as what's going on, it's a very complicated situation, right? Because you have these people that now have to make a choice of do I sell the land or do I rebuild? And they're not builders, right? They don't know what goes into it. And the cities, I think still trying to figure out one, what happened and how it happened, as well as, okay, how do we get these permits through faster? Because this could take years, to rebuild.
Yeah, it's obviously devastation. Obviously, saving people's lives is clearly the first thing that's
Of
important, but then
course.
also, there's the loss of life and pets and everyone's their cherished belongings. So it's clearly something that's on the minds of everyone. And it's and how to if you're going to build back, how do you build back better? Um,
Right.
and LA is just, I mean, it's really prime real estate. I think the saddest thing for me being just, being the East Coast guy is that it seemed like the Palisades was kind of a diverse area of not just like, multi-million dollar mansions. It seemed like it had more, common people, right? So it wasn't just, $10 million homes and people love that it was like this really great community.
You know, eh, the Palisades was actually one of our favorite neighborhoods. It would be about a 45-minute drive from where we live, and we would go. Like, we actually went last year on my birthday because we love the Palisades so much. And like, they had what's called the Village, which was outdoor, restaurants and shopping, all of that. The developer, he's developed all throughout Los Angeles, and that was actually one of his latest projects. Um, and it was its own world, which is what made it so unique. And you're right. There were the $10 million homes, $15 million homes, and then there were the homes for a couple million, right? Just because the value of land and everything. I think the average price point at one point was around 3.5 million. Um, there was a lot of families because the schools were excellent, and you are close to the beach. So you got a lot of that better weather. It was a great lifestyle for those that lived there. And so that's where I think a lot of those, residents are having that challenge of like, do I come back because it's such a great place to live? Or if I rebuild, is it going to catch on fire again? And is that something that I really want to deal with again? Do I want to take that risk?
Right. And will insurance companies, will you be able to get a loan on that, or does it have to be cash? And then, so certainly, that's certainly devastation. In real estate, we have to go with the flow, right? Every time you answer your phone, there's a new something that happened. And so you kind of have to be, I feel to represent clients well and to really be in the business, you have to answer the phone and then have a great like Rolodex of people who you could call to help people. And I know from listening to a little bit about what your company's about, it's kind of like you tell us the problem and we're going to work together how to fix it. It could be
Right.
anything, right? Not always necessarily real estate related. I have a client right now who basically was kicked out of his condo and been living in a hotel for 3 years, and the building's trying to basically foreclose on the condo, but they basically kicked him out of, and he's 93,
Uh,
doesn't really have any money, and he doesn't have a mortgage, and there was actually a foreclosure that's supposed to happen in a couple of weeks. Not from like the note, but from owing, the HOA, and you would have thought that smart minds would have gotten together and maybe gotten him someone from legal aid to represent him and say, how do we sell this so that because that's his only asset. So, 3 years later, he's now out of money. And I've been working with the people that are going to help him get into assisted living. So it's things that you wouldn't even imagine. And I feed him, I bring him clothes, and it's because it's not really about in the end, it's about people, right? What we really
right.
do is we try to help people. So that's what's going on. We're both in an expensive market. I would think that maybe I'm in the suburb of New York, but we're probably more similar in that. But you know, how do you work? How do you guide your buyers and sellers in an expensive market?
Yeah, so what makes LA unique, as I'm sure New York as well, is like we have 209 neighborhoods just within the city of LA. So it's like, look, if you can't afford one neighborhood, usually the question I ask my clients is like, what lifestyle do you want? And then based off your lifestyle, it's like, okay, well, there's all these other neighborhoods that might be within your price range. And then people start thinking, like, oh, I didn't think about that area. Or even like the next city over. Hey, look, that area has good schools. You get more for your money, all of that. Then they start moving. So you have a lot of that. You have more conversations than what you did before. Before it was like my clients were like, hey, look, I just want to be this area. Now they're like, well, I can't afford this area, but I want this lifestyle. What do I do? Right?
Exactly.
So we've been having more conversations like that with people. So we are seeing a lot of that on the kind of the first time home buyer side, where they're generally much more price sensitive, much more interest rate sensitive. We tend to put our investor hat on. So we say, okay, could you rent by the room, right? House hacking. That's one of my specialties. I've house hacked twice now here in LA. That's where you buy a property and rent by the room, or you rent out a second unit. And so for a lot of my clients, like I have clients that we're going to start looking soon, and the wife was like, I don't really want a tenant on my property. And I said, okay, well, alternatively, you could buy a condo and your neighbor could be a tenant. What's the difference?
Right.
And she's like,
Right.
oh, crap. All right, fine, we'll do it.
So from the house hack, I mean, I know that if you have what is it called? The ADU, I think is
Yeah, the accessory
the
dwelling unit. Yep.
ADU. So is that you mean from an ADU perspective, or less official than that?
Both. So you could rent out a second bedroom. With the clients I was referring to, they're married, they have a kid on the way. They don't want roommates.
Right.
So
Is that
don't
that's
blame
legal
them.
or is that legal in California or not necessarily?
Good question. Depends on who's listening. No, it's one of those where like I haven't heard of anyone really cracking down on it because the city knows they're short on housing. So if they
Right.
can rent another
Especially right,
bedroom.
especially now. So right. And what's also interesting is right, they have those things like the pods that you can bring a pod in on your property
Mhm.
for like your parents, right? Like older people or younger kids, right? Like so it's not in the house. So it is so
Yeah.
basically all you're talking about is thinking outside the box and trying to be creative to help people with a budget.
Exactly. And understand that it's not forever.
Right.
I think that's where people tend to like really harp on. I'm like, like in our case, we have an ADU permitted. It's a rentable guest house. We used to live there actually, rent out the main house. Now we've switched. We could afford not to rent it out, but we'd like the income. But in the
Right.
beginning, we were struggling.
Well, in the beginning, you were in it. Right.
Right?
So it's like, well, which is, I think that's the thing. So I've been in my family house since 1997 because I'm old. I know you're young. I'm old. So it's kind of like, you obviously, and so again, I'm in real estate. This is my ninth year. So I've had other careers, but I've become probably a better agent because I'm a homeowner. I'm older. I have different experiences. Not that you can't have those experiences younger, but for me, who wasn't in real estate, I have an understanding of stuff. But like, you don't want to get house poor, right? Where you're
Right.
having ramen noodles, and not even good ramen noodles. Like, I don't mind having ramen noodles every day if it comes from a really good store, but I don't want the ones that have all the sodium in it that are from the supermarket.
Right.
Um, so you have to get a budget that makes sense. And there is like the circle of life. And so when you're younger, generally you're making less money. And as you advance and get more experience, hopefully you're capitalizing on your experience and you'll get a little
Right.
bit more money. Um, there's a fine line that you don't want to buy the house that you can only afford now in case something happens, and there's always things that can go wrong. So there is a fine line. Um, I like what you said about talking about different neighborhoods because I think back in the day, even before we were both in real estate, people would go they'd go to the town, they'd go to a brick and mortar real estate office, and they would go
Yeah.
there and there'd be a book. And you would open up the book and there would be like, whether it's color or printed things of each house with a key
Sure.
in it, right? And that's where the keys would be.
Yeah.
And so um, so it's clearly the internet has done amazing things to show people. So the internet has allowed really that you don't need that brick and mortar location anymore, and people don't necessarily go there to see it. And certainly there's no key in that book because the keys are at the house in an electronic lockbox. So it's I think opened up where people would consider living as the world's gotten smaller in a sense
Yeah.
through technology. So um,
I agree. And even things like, Instacart, right? Like, do I really need to be walking distance to a grocery store anymore? I got Amazon. I have all these services. So I'm a big fan of walkability, but like you don't necessarily have to have it as much as you used to.
right, and walkability might also be just walking around with a stroller or your dog or whatever is, and it's walkable. Maybe not
Hmm.
to the store, but again, who some people do. But a lot of people are like, oh, doesn't everyone always ask you, is that a working fireplace? Right? They're like, is that a working fireplace? And I'm like, you're never using that fireplace anyway.
Right.
Um,
I don't like, do you care? Well, no. But I'm like, then why?
I have two fireplaces in my house and we don't use it because then I have to clean it. So it's funny. So the longest time this is within, for the longest time, I'm like, I don't use it. I don't need to clean it. And then I realize because of now my 9 years in real estate, I'm like, you really need to still clean it because that's actually that's your furnace is using your
Mhm.
fireplace and I'm like, oh, like, like you went to, it's not something that you technically would know about. So that is the question you always get. Is it a wood burning fireplace? And I'm like, you probably want a gas one anyway, because those are cleaner, right? You turn it
Yeah.
on, they look nice, turn it off.
And look, 90, at least here, and I always tell all my clients, like, look, 99% of fireplaces have something wrong with them. Whether it's a code change, whether it's, wear and tear, like I've rarely seen a very clean fireplace inspection.
I mean, ours, it's not something that's a big, like they kind of look up, oh, the flue works okay, and it's move on. It's not,
Yeah.
and again, you should be doing regular maintenance on,
Hmm.
regular cleaning. But that's the fireplace one's the funny one that
Yeah.
you always get. So and so I do think that you said it where you want to know what people's wants and needs are, or their,
Yeah.
or what they want to have and what they must have, and then try to open up opportunities outside of maybe the area that they were thinking about. Because the more the more you're open to thinking to being open-minded, the less right, the less costly the search is going to be for you.
And also, I've noticed those are also some of the best appreciating markets because as people get priced out, they have to go somewhere.
So great, that's great. I was actually I'm working right now. We put a bid in on a brand new house. And as they were looking at the neighborhoods, they're like, but there's an old house across the street. I'm like, yeah, because if every house was better than yours, then this house would cost more money. And this
Yeah.
was like a reasonable price. I think it was listed for like 799, and we bid
Hmm.
750. It's been on the market for like 2 months. But then they're like, but this client doesn't want to get in a price war. I'm like, but if it had a great town and all this, you're not bidding on it because you already told me you're not doing a price war. So, so I guess you have to, so it's okay. So let's keep looking type of stuff because maybe I can get them a house that's in that price point. Maybe it won't be as nice, but maybe they're telling me that the houses on their block mean more than them than how brand new their house is.
Yeah. And even on the ones that price war, because I get that all the time. Like, I don't want to be involved in the price war. I'm like, or you just offer what you're comfortable with. If you don't get it, you don't get it. Who cares? Like on a practical base, like you don't just because you're in a price war, right? If there's multiple off, doesn't mean you have to now compromise more. Just offer what you're comfortable with. If they accept it, they accept it.
I call it your pain point. You should bid to your pain point. And everyone has a different pain point. This is
Yeah.
closer to my work. It's further away. This is this is that. Your pain point is that, in my view, you have to at least be willing to bid to the point that if somebody bid anything less, that or less, and you'd be pissed, and you should have bid higher because you still would have bought the house. Anything higher than that, you good, good for them. We weren't going to that number, and so people need to know. And there's a lot of factors, right? How how big is the house? All the walkability, all that, but also things like what are the taxes, right? Because
Hmm.
we have a lot of different taxes in our town, and so some taxes are much higher than others, and so maybe you're willing to pay more because the taxes are $10,000 a year less for this house. So that's an annuity. So you really need to, and how much work does the house need, right? So the house
Sure.
isn't just the cost of the house. It's
Right.
what does it cost to get to be where you want it? And so you have to kind of, and that's where like the greatest stat just came out, a couple of weeks ago from the National Association of Realtors that like 77% of real estate agents did zero transactions last
Yeah.
year. So it's like, yeah, it's because part-time people are doing it or they want to sell for a friend or do this. And so that's great from our perspective because you're doing, 30 to 50 deals a year. People flock to us because they just yesterday someone's like, "Are you a full-time agent?" And I go, "Yes, I am." So they must have seen that stat. They're like, "Are you just doing this part?" I'm like, "No, this is my job." And
Right.
I did 65 deals last year for $42 million. And I had my numbers in my, I know what my numbers are. And I'm also the broker, and we've done 75 million as a brokerage. And so yeah, this is our business. And they're right? You don't want someone who's really the fire, the police officer, firefighter, or the gym teacher that's doing this on the side.
Yeah. I don't know. People have asked me about part-time agents. I'm like, I don't know how there's not enough. You can't. I could see back in the day when people stayed in their homes for like 20, 30 years. Like, yeah, people don't move. Now people are moving so much. And even now I know the time's getting longer, but it's like, when are you gonna have time to show properties? Then you get a property accepted. When are you gonna have time to schedule inspections? I remember I had a cash buyer, an investor. I called the listing agent. She's like, "Oh, can I call you back? I'm at my full-time job right now." I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, does your seller know this?
I know it's almost like I wish that that could go to the seller because it's ridiculous.
And if you're and I heard, I think it was the CEO of Compass that said, National Association of Realtors kind of wants the part-time agents because they charge the same fee. So they want as many agents as possible,
Right.
you
But
know,
but
but that's not
right.
where
So
we're heading.
right. But it's funny because wants to have no clear cooperation, which I don't think really helps. Having an off-market deal doesn't generally help the seller. and helps the listing agent potentially be a dual agent. That's really what it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I will say it because I've done it here in LA. In LA, you sometimes have high profile clients. Sometimes you want to test the price. I actually got my client like an extra 100K because it was
Right.
off
So I think
market.
that's a different, so that's different. If you, let's say if you had a professional appraisal, right? Well, because I do that on my higher end and they say it's worth $3 million. And you're like, let's put it out for 3.5 and see what it does. And because that person doesn't really want it on the market, then that's different, right? That makes
Sure.
sense. But for a normal person off market, it doesn't make sense.
You're a great example of that. I had a listing, this was in 2021, right? Where you could list it, like overprice it and still sell. And I showed it off market and they submitted an offer 25 grand above what we are going to list it for. I'm like, okay, well, to cooperate with the rules and everything, I did post in the MLS. And then I started getting blind offers for higher, higher, higher. And I told my client, I'm like, I know we have this great offer, but I think you can get more if we go to the open market. And more often than not, you're right. The homes, you don't really know what price you're going to get unless you get full exposure. Really, at the end of
Uh,
the day, you're just not
100%.
because you don't know.
No, I and this is where my wife is. My wife's an attorney, a partner in New York City as an attorney, and she hears me talking all the time, and we've had this conversation where like I never. and So myself and my partner and my wife, we bought an investment property. We own a townhouse in our town. We rent it out. That we got that property off market because it was a different situation. The person was a bit of a hoarder. It would be embarrassing if they had to put it on the
Mhm.
market, and they had a family, and we came with enough money that it made sense for them, right?
Right.
The brother of the person has a lot of money, and so it was just, and he's a protector of his sister, so it wasn't like I don't need to get the top, like $50,000 wouldn't have really mattered in this. We paid, I think,
Sure.
uh 585 or whatever. It wouldn't have really mattered, and it was a cash deal. It was seamless. So in that case, it worked, but they definitely would have gotten more money. So
Hmm.
I just had two that I put on this one that I actually am preventing it from foreclosing. It's ridiculous, but they made me pay $10,000 to to go to the referee. I had to pay $10,000 to the basically to the condo's attorney to get a 60-day stay of the auction, which is really
Wow.
silly. And
It
I put up
is.
my own money, which is actually crazy because he's 93 without a will, and so I actually had to take a mortgage. He had no mortgage. I had to actually write a mortgage to lien his property
Mm,
because if something would have happened to him, this would still take me probably 2 years for me to get my money back. Um,
sure.
and I'm doing it because I want to help him. The joke is we were talking about what he was going to pay me to sell his place, and he was haggling with me. I'm like, you're haggling with me? I just put up $10,000. I'm charging you nothing for that. I've been bringing you food. I've been bringing you clothes. And he's like,
Yeah.
and then eventually he's like, fine, you can have it. It was like $3,500, the extra percent.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I'm getting this man, whatever. And I'm like, I'm charging you for none of that. And he's like, oh, okay, I guess you deserve it.
Oh,
So, uh, but
yeah.
he's very. I'm very happy to help him, and it's
Sure.
actually it's my pleasure to be able to do that for him. But um, his place we put on the market. I had people that go there and they're like, it's only worth X, and we put it on the market and we got much higher than that. Which is in this situation we had to put it on the market because there's protective services involved and there's a lot of different things going on. So I want to have it clearly want it on the market because I want to say, listen, the reason, and I ended up being a dual agent because the county attorney was actually taking too long to get back to approve it. And then another
Mm,
property in the same building went on, which made ours look too expensive. So the person actually dropped, and we had to go find the next person. So it's always something. And I had another house that I'm selling that is maybe 30% finished, and somebody said it was only worth like 500,000. we put it on the market and an egregious 7.99, like in my mind, right? But something's worth what someone's willing to pay. And multiple
Right.
people were even over that. Multiple people. So I clearly that you know what, it was 6 acres in a great town that there's like a farm behind it. So what I valued was different than someone who's like, I don't really care if I overpay in a sense, because to them, they're gonna make the house even bigger. They're doing a 4-car garage. They're gonna put an in-ground pool. So they're making this like an estate basically. And so
Yeah.
to them, $200,000 difference is irrelevant, right? Because they're like, that's what we just want to do that. So and again, that was from putting something on the market.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree. And even on like the fixer side, I get investors asking, "Hey, do you have any fixers?" And I had to explain to them, I was like, "Look, every single one of my fixers, unless like I know it's an actual teardown, has always sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars more than what an investor would pay." So, unfortunately, if I even do get a fixer listing, I have to put it on the open market.
right, I'm the same way that I'm working with an investor. I sold one of our properties in 8 days after it was on the market. I sold it for 8 days for more money, like 100,000 more than when it was on the market for 60 days with someone else. And so a
Oh,
lot of it is, like you said, it's communicating. It's you know it was listed by a national company. They had exposure, they had open houses. They just dropped the ball when it came to inspections and how do you deal with it and how do you get to the finish line. And I go 8 days from listing to contract, which is, I just was doing what I do. Like I don't
right.
feel that it was anything special except that I worked my butt off. I'm available, and then did open houses, and then we found the right person. But they were looking during the time period. They just didn't see this house. So it was cash. It was fast. It was crazy. So my investors like, where are your deals? I like when people bring me deals, and I feel the same that you just said, that if I'm selling if I'm selling a house for an estate or somebody, it has to go on the market, because that's the way that you get at least you either get the most money for it, or at least you're letting your sellers know that you're doing your best to try to get them the highest value.
And look, worst case scenario, you go sell it to the investor.
Right.
I
So
mean,
well, most of my investors also, they're never going to buy it, because end users, because this market is a silly market still in New York, where
mhm,
investors, like someone that's flipping a house, the economics is a lot different than someone that's going to keep it for themselves,
sure.
or keep it in rent, right? So I guess that's that would be I guess a question. We talked about how do you help your clients in an expensive market, but how do you help yourself and other and how do you help investors in an expensive market make the numbers work?
Yeah, so you have to get creative, right? So, for example, I had an investor buy a property last year where there was a two-bedroom house in the front, and then there was an unpermitted second unit. And it's like, so I had a conversation with the agent. I said, look, you kind of need my buyer to be the one to buy this because they're fine with the construction. I'm familiar with how to get it permitted. Like, this is the best team for this. They end up going with another offer because everyone makes mistakes.
Okay.
And I explained to the agent, I was like, look, there's rent control here in LA. They had to factor that in, all that. They still accepted a higher offer. It fell out of escrow because the buyer started doing their due diligence and realized how complicated it was. They came back to us and I negotiated it 50 grand below what we initially offered. Had she accepted our offer, the seller would have
Right.
gotten 50 grand more.
Right. So that is, I think that's another thing where, when we go to listing presentations, it's not just taking it's vetting the offer. It's
Right.
checking, it's who's the lender, because there are some lenders that are good and some that are terrible. And sometimes you'll take less money. Vetting is as much of important as taking professional photos and drone pictures, right?
Right. I mean, I think that's really the big thing. So when people say like our real estate agents overpaid, what they don't realize, like an agent who does even just we'll say 10 to 12 deals a year is still like that's still keeping up with the market. It's like, yeah, I know what goes into each transaction. The last time you bought or sold a house was 30 years ago. Things have
Right. Well,
changed so much. People
it,
didn't do inspections 30 years ago.
well, isn't everything $1 million listing? I mean, I watch it all the time in LA. I mean, doesn't everyone get make as much money that they do on all their deals? Isn't that like a normal thing?
Absolutely, but we blow the money, and that's how we stay so poor.
Well, you're probably blowing the money on those like $50,000 open houses, that
Right.
because they're camera crew. It's expensive to get the camera crews there. Um, and selling the joke of like selling Sunset is, and when they actually go back and look at what the sales are of the people on the team, there's like zero.
Oh yeah.
They're like 90. So, but I will say they make great television. So,
Yes.
there's,
There's
there's
something there.
totally there's totally something there. Um,
Yeah.
but
It's an interesting because like I see just like in marketing in general, like there's a agent in my neighborhood that he farms it. So yeah, of course I check his sales because I'm curious to see if there's a
right,
correlation. I do like double the business he does.
yeah,
And I don't spend a dime. Like this is the first year in a long time I started doing postcards again.
yeah. I kind of so I'm a broker, right? So
Hmm.
I have agents that I try to mentor as well. I always felt the postcards were for vanity, right? It made me feel
Hmm.
better that I knew that I was sending a postcard with my picture, but I don't really see that really turned into stuff.
So what I'm doing differently this time is I'm reaching out to investor-owned properties and I talk about each postcard is about 1031 exchange. It talks about what is the average cash for keys agreement right now in LA, right? Which is like $23,000. It's have you thought about doing a Delaware statutory trust to where you don't have to go buy another property? So the message, at least, and we'll see how this works. We can talk about a year from now, see how it goes. But the message is very different because you're right. It's like I get these postcards just sold, and I've done that in the past. The problem is it's so much about timing. Like you have to get the
Right.
person right when they're actually thinking about selling. And then now with the higher interest rates and you have all these people locked in at 3% interest rates, like, yeah, it's going to be hard pressed to convince them to move anyways.
A lot of people, it's junk mail and they really just toss it
Yeah.
anyway, right? So, I mean, for me, what I've tried to do is really focus on the transaction so that when the transaction's over, it's not to me, it's not about the money, it's about the review that I'm going to get after. And I send everyone
Mhm.
links to do reviews because I've actually seen that people they're not trolling me, but they're looking and they see me
Mhm.
and they're reading the reviews. So people call me because of my reviews. So again, um, it's cheaper because I don't have to send stuff out. What I am doing is trying to get more buyers and sellers so that I get more transactions. But I'm kind of doing that anyway. So um,
Right.
that's kind of why like I do a podcast, right? So I do a podcast because there are many different ways that people can reach out and see you. And so, I mean, I love Rick, meeting people like yourself and having a cool conversation and going from there. But so my wife's like, why you keep doing this? And I'm like, I'm meeting people, but also it's good to have this, the episodes that other people can go find, whether if they're
Sure.
looking to see, oh, is that a topic that they want to talk about? Who is this guy? Um, you know, it is, or then no one's going to listen. So we don't know, but I feel like it's a better investment for me to do this and meet people than sending out postcards. But I probably will do that again from time to time because again, you think that we're supposed to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree. So it's just like, it's about the message and, who knows? I think the problem in the past has been people are very general. I think you can't really be a generalist anymore, right? Like I have a buddy of mine and he does door knocking. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like I've tried it, didn't really work for me. There's agents that totally kill it. But like, they say people want to work with someone they know, like, and trust. Well, they don't know you as you knock on the door. They don't trust you because they know you're trying
Right.
to sell something, and they automatically don't like you. And then people are like, well, it's all about the message. Okay, what message? Oh, here's some general sales in the area. I'm like, meh.
Yeah,
Meh.
I actually am. I am much less. So I know that you guys, your CMA is you have a
Mhm.
proprietary CMA, but that's different because that's like coming with knowledge and information
Right.
that they might not get elsewhere. So that's a little different. That's probably more for a sit down meeting where you're actually going
Correct.
over what it is. So I think that that does make sense. I'm more fly by the seat of the pants guy. If I am wearing pants, because I wear shorts a lot too. I'm not the suit guy, right? Like that's
Yeah.
not what makes me,
I
right?
tried
What
that.
makes
Didn't work for me.
it's not me. I don't do it. And so I think what I get is I'm more authentic. I hear that a lot. They're like, oh, that is really you. You really are wearing shorts in our show. I'm like, yeah, because ultimately it's hot out and you don't care and wear. I'm like, you be comfortable. I'm going to be comfortable because ultimately, like, we're gonna if we need to see a house at 8:30 in the morning, I'm gonna roll out of bed and we're gonna go see the house. And so it's ultimately it's
Yeah.
being there for people, and so my shtick a little bit is that you can text me 24/7. I'll probably answer 18/7.
Mhm.
You talk about the other people that like when you call them up and the voicemail is like, oh, if it's after 6 o'clock, I'm not going to respond to you until tomorrow, except if it's a weekend and every other weekend, I'm not going to talk to you at all until Monday. I mean, it's like, I'm like, that's not this business, right? And so maybe people
Right.
can control, maybe people, this is my work-life balance and I can control it. I'm also older now, right? I'm an empty nester. So it's a little different, but like that, people need you when they need you,
Yeah.
and I feel that that's the way that that I get listings and whatever, and then word of mouth, and so so I'm actually a byproduct of Zillow in the sense that when I first started, I would pay for Zillow. My company did something, then I did my own. And then I turned those in. And some of those now from 8 or 9 years ago, I've turned into 11 to 12 transactions.
Yeah.
So because it's a client and then they refer you to people and whatever. And so, um, when people try to talk about the ROI of getting clients, it's hard to get a client and you want to keep them and the easiest way the way to do it is not and for me it's like you said it's not door knocking. I've never door knocked. I refuse to door knock even though it could be great for people.
Yeah.
My thing is just keep get clients spend the time over satisfying them and then asking if they have anybody. It doesn't even have to be New York. I can refer to California. I can refer anywhere in the world. And so and doing that and then promoting it. So social media, I think, of the business that I'm doing and the interactions that I have is much more important than I'd rather door knock on someone's Instagram or someone's Facebook than actually down their block.
Yeah. I've noticed with social media, for me, it's been more of a validator, right? So I haven't necessarily gotten a direct lead from Instagram, but like for example, I closed on one a few months ago and she had reached out to me through Instagram, but she didn't find me on Instagram. She found me somewhere else.
Right.
But they
Oh,
want to see
that's how
like,
they sometimes track your number down, right?
yeah, or like they just want to see if you're real. They want to see if you're active. I had to sell a property for someone in Northern California, and yeah, I stalked the Instagram profiles. I'm like, are they active? Like
Yeah.
I'm not expecting them to have tens of thousands of followers, but like, are they posting just listed? Are they posting just sold? Like, I just want to know that there is that extra exposure.
Yeah, and then the other thing I would say is if you my Instagram is more always thanking the people that are involved in the transaction from
Hmm.
the other generally all the other agent, but like the home inspector, the lawyer, I'll say stuff for the photographer and I'll thank people and congratulations. And as opposed to people are like I closed this in 3 days and I got $600,000 over list. And I'm like, okay, well, to me, what that said, my self-talk is, well, you mispriced it if you're $600,000 under, right? Or over. And why are you sticking it to the buyer that they kind of overpaid? Like, so,
Mm,
and we don't need to be like, oh, how great you are. It's really more, together, we all work together to try to do it. And so, right? So everyone has to have what they're about, and mine isn't about putting anyone down. It's about building everyone up. And I do think that in order to have a successful transaction, win-win relationships are clearly possible.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach because you could even make the argument that if you tag, all these vendors, now they're also getting exposure and inherently they may want to return the favor.
I tag people all the time. I tag my
Yeah,
lender, right? I tag. My family makes fun of my texting and how much I do it and the tags. But yes, I will tag, and so I'll make a point. Okay, if I don't have, if it's someone new, what I ask the other agent, what's your Instagram, what's your Facebook, so that I can tag them, because then I'm also getting all of the, it multiplies, right? And
sure.
then make them feel good too, that I'm saying, oh, thank you so much for bringing your buyer, or I appreciate you, but you've been a great listing agent. I will always, you know what? I'm not always a listing agent. I'm not always a buyer's agent, right? I go back and forth. That's why I also find it interesting when people say things like, "Oh, I only take listings," and I'm like, "You only take listings?" I'm like, I couldn't even say that. I mean, so when I started, my in the beginning, right? You're really mostly buyers. At least that's
Sure.
what I was. And then I remember it was like 3 years later, or 3 or 4, and I that year I did 18 and 18. And I was like, okay, that's good that and that's because buyers become sellers. And
Right.
so, you know, I'm focused on helping clients, whether it's buying or selling.
Same.
I don't have I mean, listings are certainly easier, right? In the sense of
Higher
it's
probability of
easier.
closing.
It's easier in the sense of driving, right? Like you're driving
Sure.
less. But I had some hard ones where I just did the house that was 30% built. There's actually a structure on the property, and as the broker, I'm thinking about ways to mitigate potential risk. And I came up with basically a hold harmless form, right? And
Mm.
and I used, which is funny, having a daughter who's an attorney and a wife who's an attorney, but I used AI to create my hold harmless form. So I
Yeah.
basically fed into Trustpilot, is the one on my computer, and it's the free one. And I basically said, help me create a hold harmless form that would be used for this, and this. And it basically, threw something out. I was able to basically take that and basically make it. So for that listing, I wouldn't approve anyone until they basically fill this out. And of course, the
Sure.
listing said what you need to do. And as you know, people don't read the directions, you know, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
well, are you taking the client because you didn't sign this, like, to the agents? And I'm like, so I would wait, because it was danger. Well, it could have been dangerous if it was basically walking on a jungle gym. That was basically what it would be like. So, which is fine, but I wanted them to at least understand that, and making them sign something, I thought, make drew more attention that this isn't going to be a normal showing.
It's funny. I went through a broker open years ago, like years ago, and they had to sign a waiver before walking in saying there's mold and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to be here for very long anyways. They had food to serve
That is see.
inside the house.
No,
I'm walking.
you should never have to sign a mold release if they're serving food, except if they were cheese, because cheese is molded.
Fair
It-
enough. But like
So
me and this other random agent are walking through it, and like there's like this whole platter and all that. I'm like, didn't we just sign a waiver saying there's mold in the house and now they want us to eat the food?
it's unbelievable. So that's the genesis of my podcast, The Adventures of a Real Estate Broker. It's like stories like that. And
Yeah.
so I'm actually writing a book. I'm almost finished with the book. I actually was working with my editor today to do that, because they're just weird things that happen. I have houses that had skulls in it, pornography, guns, and it's like, what do you do? Like, well, for the skulls, I had to call the police. I'm like, we have two skulls here. You need to come here and take it as evidence and see. And so there's the
Yeah.
whole testing of
Oh yeah.
DNA and finding out. It took like a week, but we found that those were real skulls, but it actually was removed from the body for 100 years. So they're like, okay, my client was an estate. The person died. He was a postal worker. We're like, did this guy really go postal? We didn't really know, but it turns out he was more of a collector. So,
I have one for you then. So
good. And
when
that's
My wife, fiance at the time, now wife, we were buying our current house. The guy was selling because his wife had passed away. He wanted to move, all that. Cool. One of 17 offers. We got it. That's a whole nother strategy, a whole nother conversation. 3 days into escrow, the listing agent gets a call from some lady saying, "Why are you selling my house?" She was never dead. And the seller
Wow.
had no idea.
So it was that. So you started off buying from an illegal seller.
Basically, so the guy was selling, but he was under the impression that his wife had passed away. But she
Oh, they were
actually,
just. Oh,
yeah.
so I
So
guess in the end of the day, she came along because and accepted it.
yeah. So it's just like I remember telling my wife, I was like, "Hey, here's what's happening," and I'm cracking up. And she's
Right.
like, "This isn't funny." I'm like, "Well, it's better than the opposite."
Exactly.
Like, and the seller was an appraiser by trade, so I knew he wasn't trying to pull a fast one because he would know better.
Yeah, but how did he not know that it was his ex-wife?
So what one of the neighbors ended up telling me was they were already like going towards separation, and then something happened where like an ambulance came and the person went away, and then a friend came by saying the person passed, here's a death certificate.
He
And then,
actually had a death certificate.
well, I mean, how many death certificates have you seen? Like the average person doesn't see that many death certificates. How would they know if it's legitimate or not?
Right, but it would be weird that someone presented an improper death certificate.
I, I guess, but I was
That
like,
is that's certainly good. I mean, um, I had a house where I lent like $25,000 for the person between doing. They had to redo the deck, they had to paint the house, and then they had no all their money was in the house. I lent them this before we sold. I also had to help them uh, first month, last month, and security of the next place that they were going to because they
wow,
didn't have any money. And then at the last minute, we realized she didn't own the house herself. Her father, what she believed to be that she owned it, her sisters also were two owners. There was three owners, and it was like,
oh,
but luckily, and there everyone was really old. Luckily, everyone renounced the other two people renounced their ownership, and they were like, because they could have been like, no, Dad wanted me to have the house too.
yeah,
They neither of them did that, but I was like, oh, that could have been bad because
oh
you
yeah,
know so that's another that's
yeah, that's a good
a
one.
great, yeah, so that's there's always crazy stories happening, but I think that's the thing, we have to roll with these things, right? That happened for
Yeah.
your house, it can happen all over, but that's why being full-time certainly important, because we a lot of it has happened, but a lot of it hasn't happened, and so it's like put your and just use your common sense, at least our common sense, and bring in the right people, and for the most part, you can get things taken care of for the most part.
I totally agree. You know, I tell my clients, I'm like, look, I'm a smart ass, not a know-it-all. So if I don't know the answer, I'll find it.
A lot of what I say also, I'm a connector, right? So it's not,
Hmm.
I don't need to be the person that knows everything, right? But it's good that I have the person that I have this person, I have that person, because
Yeah,
ultimately, right, like I'm not a home. I mean, how many home inspections have we both gone on? We probably have gone on 2,000 maybe together,
sure.
and so we're probably pretty good now walking through a house looking what maybe, right, because really a home inspector is not going inside the wall, so they're really just
Right.
looking at the same things that we're looking at. um, and so, you know, but I'm going to hire a professional home inspector because that's what you do. And I'm lucky because New York is a lawyer state.
Hmm.
So I think California is too, right? You
No.
might dress. Oh, so you don't. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's nuts. So we do. So in I also am licensed in Connecticut. In Connecticut, you pick which one you want, but the agents will draft the initial contract, but then it
Mhm.
goes to lawyers because they can change it if they want, or they can keep what you have. At least you're having a lawyer look at it,
Yep.
right?
Nope. No lawyers
You're right.
involved.
No lawyers. You just use title people. So,
Yeah,
um,
title and escrow. So escrow will come up with their escrow instructions, but those instructions are based off of the purchase contract that we
right.
put together. Yeah.
I do like that I get to punt to the lawyers, but it's a little
I don't
different
blame you.
because, well, except that in your market, you could see a house, you write the offer, and because I listen to $1 million listings, write the
Of
offer.
course.
So you write the offer, but you get bound immediately, right? So Um, you actually send the money, right? So the deposit, the binder is actually real money that gets sent to your escrow company. Is that how they do it?
Yes. Well, so you submit the offer and then you negotiate, and once it's accepted, it's accepted. Typically, you have 3 days. It's calendar days, which is a little bit BS.
Right,
Because if you have acceptance on Friday, you lose the weekend. But no one really like enforces that. So on a practical basis, we say 3 business days to wire the earnest money deposit, which is typically about 3% of the purchase price. And that does go to the escrow company. The escrow company is they're supposed to be an independent third party to help with the transaction. The example I always use is you go to the store and to buy a laptop, escrow is the people at the cash register. They're the ones that are exchanging ownership. They're the ones who are, you know, going through
right.
that process.
Because what's funny in Connecticut, well, again, I didn't go to law school, but I know that a contract is when you have offer, acceptance, and consideration. So without
Right.
either of any of those three, it's not really a contract. In Connecticut, you actually, if you choose to have that the agents write up the contract, you write it up, you sign it, and people will write a check that you just take a picture of the check and it doesn't get deposited anywhere.
It's just
And I'm like,
there.
and I'm like, so I do much more in New York. I do in Connecticut. I'm like, no, I'm a broker. I'm like, I'll hold the money. Someone has to hold the money. This money needs to
Right.
be cashed, or
Yeah.
technically the other party could get out there. Like we didn't really have a contract, right?
I was in escrow to buy a property out of state, and I never wired the deposit. And then we ended up having to cancel. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I never gave a deposit. No one gave me instructions or anything, so I just let it be. I'm the buyer.
Right.
But in other states, one of the biggest things I've learned is, and I don't know how it is where you are, for the contingencies, are they automatically released? So they
What?
say you have 10 days to do inspections. On the
Right.
10th day, if you don't do anything, it's automatically released. That contingency, or does the buyer actually have to actively release the
We don't
contingency?
really do it. What's interesting is in New York and Connecticut are a little bit different, but in New York, you actually put an offer, it gets accepted. You get an accepted offer. It's your job to now go inspect. You can
Right.
go pay $1,700, $1,000, $1,500. You might test septic, you might test whatever. You're going to test the house, right?
Sure.
The well, all that other stuff. Well, you're not in contract. So somebody else during that period, they'll still show the house. So somebody
I've
else can come on top of you and do a bigger offer. Sometimes they'll take the house off the market. I generally, as a listing agent, never want to take it off the market because it slows down the process and then it gives the power to the buyer that, we don't really, or we're going to ask for this because they pulled the house. So it's better generally not to. And it's conducive that the buyer then quickly tries to go through those things. So that's one way. But sometimes it's kind of what you say, where you go to contract and you have X amount of days to do inspections. I just did one of these in Connecticut. I had 10 business days to run all my inspections. I think if I don't pull the offer, it's like it passes. So it's not that. It's like the opposite. You would actually have to purposely say there's a problem and I want out. Otherwise,
Mhm.
you are in contract. Well, the
Yeah.
only difference is after that 10 days, you're probably then, supposed to do a real deposit, right? Not just a nominal deposit.
Yeah, so here in California, it's once you're in escrow and like everyone has agreed and everyone signed the contract, you can accept other offers for backup, but the seller can't cancel as long as the buyer's performing. But even then, let's say we're on the 10th day, I'm using that as an example, the buyer has to actively release that contingency. It's not automatically released.
Right. So
And
yeah, so
yeah.
yeah, so we don't do that. So it is again, that's where you need to use a strategy to
Hmm.
what's best for your list. If you're a lister or if you're a buyer,
Right.
how do you do it and make sense that you're taking care of and doing the proper inspections, right? When you represent a
Yeah.
buyer, you want to make sure that I's are
Yeah.
dotted, T's are crossed, so that we're not going, uh-oh.
Oh yeah.
So
And I think now more than ever, because, you know, for the last couple of years, like you buy a home that was built in the 90s, we don't like to think of that as being an old house. Like, oh, that's basically new construction.
uh,
Tens
I
of
mean,
thousands of dollars later.
Exactly. So that's when everything's going, actually. So I know that the 90s is
Exactly.
a long time ago because I
But it's
graduated
also
college in
30.
90, and I graduated college in 91. So I know that that's a long time ago. So,
Right.
but
But like
but
I have a client who bought a house that was built in the 90s. And like we just didn't this was a few years ago. We just didn't think anything of it. Like we knew the house was old, but it's like since then he's replaced all the plumbing. He's replaced all the windows because the window seal started, break. He just
right,
replaced the roof. And it's just like he's not mad. My clients aren't mad or anything because they got a stellar deal to begin with. But like it's just those things we just don't think about.
exactly.
And I know it was on a different podcast. I guess they were interviewing someone from the Wall Street Journal, but he did this whole report about how the biggest issue that we're going to face in housing is, now homes are really getting old. Like we just don't think about it. Every year homes get older naturally. But now it's like, yeah, you got a home built in the 50s and it hasn't been touched. Homes built in the 90s, which don't seem that long ago. Even homes probably
Right.
built in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
You're probably not
No,
thinking, it's like, yeah, the roof's
it's
probably
25
almost
years
shot.
old, right? It's 25 years old. So I agree. Well, you know what, Rick? I think you and I could probably talk hours of this. You're an easy
Absolutely.
talk. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank
Um,
you.
Best of luck for you for the host of the Key to the City of Angels with
Yeah,
your
appreciate it.
podcast. And keep up what you're doing. It's
Yeah.
obvious to me why when your clients say that you're an absolute rock star, that I agree you are.
Thank you.
And keep it up. And you definitely give a good name, and you give us agents better street cred. So I
I
appreciate that.
try. It's a team
So
effort.
hey, that's and no door knocking.
No.
Let's try to let's both make that commitment that we're gonna grow our business without having to door knock. So
Fair
uh,
enough. We
okay,
get our
with
steps in
that.
otherwise.
Well, thank you very much. With that,
Thank you.
everyone, for another edition of the Adventures of a Real Estate Broker. Thank you, Rick, for coming on. Until next week, we'll catch you next time. Thank you, Rick.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on the Adventures of a Real Estate Broker. I hope you enjoyed our time together as much as I did. If you laughed, learned something, or just had a good time, do yourself a favor and subscribe to the podcast. A big shout out to our sponsor, Remax Prestige Properties, for making this all possible. Remember to leave a review if you enjoyed the show. It helps more people find us. Until next time, keep it real, keep it fun, and keep exploring the adventures in your neighborhood. I'm Daniel Berger, your New York Realtor, and I'll see you in the next episode.